Hello, I'm Kyle Robinson, and this is my grandfather, the retired Colonel Robby Robinson, and I'm going to be interviewing him today. We'll start with what is the history of the Vietnam War, and how did the United States get involved?
Wow. You want short answers or long answers?
However
This is
you
a
want.
history class. I'll give you a little history, okay?
All right.
I made some notes because your teacher might be checking.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Okay.
Yeah.
You got to go back to about the 19th century, believe it or not. The French colonialized East Indochina.
Mm-hmm.
The areas of Laos, Cambodia, and what became Vietnam. And over time, as with any countries that get colonialized and run by a foreign power, the people got dissatisfied. And they wanted their own separate identities.
Mm-hmm.
Then, in 1941, the French made a mistake of letting the Japanese bring some assets into their colonies.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, that didn't sit too well with the United States, since Japan just hit us at Pearl Harbor.
Yeah.
So we weren't looking real friendly at that point in time towards the arrangement or toward France's involvement. The end of World War II, the French said, we got to solve this little problem we're having over here. They proposed a French Union. They'd still run it, but they'd give Laos and Cambodia, and then what became Vietnam, parts of China, a province called An, and a province called Tonkin. They said, that can be a separate setup. At that point in time, a guy named Ho Chi Minh came into the picture. Communist. A nationalist. He founded the National Liberation Front in North Vietnam. And he said, this system is just not going to work. So he started running attacks on the borders against the French, running guerrilla raids. And over time, it got much worse and much more aggressive. By about 1951, it was just about impossible for the French to deal with. It was, I mean, they're sitting over in Europe trying to run a bunch of countries, and Ho Chi Minh's coming down the jungle and beating them up. So they proposed, and there was a Geneva conference, a peace conference in Geneva, and that ended the fighting. They divided the Vietnam into two separate countries, divided at the 17th latitude or parallel, North Vietnam and South Vietnam. But Ho Chi Minh continued to say, no, ultimately, I want the whole country. And he's communist. You got to remember, this is some of the background here is we're right in the middle of the Cold War heating up.
Yeah.
Over in Europe, the Soviet Union communist bloc is overrunning Hungary and Czechoslovakia and annexing countries and putting up the Iron Curtain.
Yeah.
Blockading Berlin.
Yeah.
So the U.S. has got all this in mind. Now we got China helping Ho Chi Minh.
Yeah.
And we're looking at the same thing happening over in the Far East. So the U.S. is getting a little uptight. Plus, we had interests over there too, particularly the Philippines, who are a protectorate of ours. And so we were concerned about that. This was all, we're now talking up to about 1961. President Kennedy's elected. And he says we better do something because he's getting some pressure. And so he said, well, we'll send some advisors, we'll send we'll send some equipment, and we'll send some money. Didn't work. Ho Chi Minh just kept conducting raids, and it was getting messier. Meanwhile, Cuba's going on. You know, Cuba heats up, 63. So the U.S. is getting itchier and itchier and itchier. 1964, there was a reported incident in the Gulf of Tonkin where a United States destroyer, Navy destroyer, was attacked. And on August the 4th, another U.S. destroyer was attacked, or U.S. ship, the Ticonderoga, was attacked in the Gulf of Tonkin. There is still debate as to whether or not we simply used that as an excuse to get into the war. Whether the politicians and the president said, okay, here's our chance to go over and spank the communists. In any event, there was a lot of debate going on in 1965, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. What to do? Congress never gave a formal declaration of war. However, they did provide to the president a permission to take all necessary efforts, and so the president went with that, and it started to snowball from there. They began to consider bombing the North. At this point, we didn't have very many troops there, but we started sending a few over. It was a slow creep of buildup. They did fly some missions in 1965, and the first Air Force guy, well, actually he was Navy. He was airman, but he was Navy. Lieutenant Alvarez was shot down and became the first prisoner of war in the Vietnam War, and stayed there for 8 years until they were released. 65 to 67 got worse. More raids. We're getting beat. We're getting beat. They're coming down the jungles. We don't understand their country. We don't understand their warfare. And we're getting beat. And there's a lot of pressure back home on now President Johnson, after President Kennedy was assassinated. Johnson's got the baby in his lap. He keeps getting pressure from the peace side of the United States to get out. He keeps getting pressure from the other side of the United States to go settle this matter. And he's juggling balls as a typical politician. So in 68, there was what was known as the Tet Offensive. The North Vietnamese came down and wreaked havoc on the South. We finally beat them back, but it got bad press in the States. That was when Johnson said, I've had enough. I'm not going to seek re-election.